Good morning, everybody. This is Carol Mahoney. We will be starting the webinar in just a few moments. And at that point, I'd like to hand over to John Bottega and Mike Atkin.
Good morning, everybody. People are still dialing in. So, Carol, why don't we give it another few minutes, as I see that people are still dialing in, and then we'll kick off. We have an hour today. We're going to try to squeeze a bit in that hour, so stay tuned. We'll start in just a few minutes, and then Carol, you'll kick us off with some of the logistics of the meeting, but just stay tuned for a few minutes more. Thanks. Carol, I wish I had some elevator music to play while we're waiting, but I don't, so we'll wait a few.
Turn on some Stevie Ray Vaughan on your computer, John. We'll all be entertained by that.
There we go. I think I'm seeing the dial-ins leveling off a bit.
Let's go.
Okay.
Let's have some respect for people who dialed in. Let's just go.
Yep, why don't we get going? All right, so welcome everyone. This is the first of a series of working group meetings. Thank you for joining on the call today. My colleague Mike Atkin, the Managing Director of the EDM Council, Mike Meriton, who's our Relationship Manager, and Carol Mahoney, who runs everything for us. So Carol is on the call. What we're going to do today, since this is our first meeting, we have a pretty large group. So I want to kind of set the stage for what the working groups are going to be. The topic today is data governance. We'll discuss that. I'm going to do this interactively. I'm going to pose some questions to the group. Carol will talk about how you can contribute. And I'm actually going to take notes live here on how the group is going to be run and what our objectives are. So let me turn us to the agenda page. Welcome, of course. I'm going to discuss a quick overview, the goals and objectives of the group, what are our expected outcomes, how we would like to run the group, and then our next steps. So let me start with our overview. Most of you know the Dcam data capability assessment model has been now out for almost 2 years. We've been enjoying some really good responses from the use of the Dcam. To date, we've had over 1,700 downloads from our website. Many of our members and partners are using the Dcam for a variety of capabilities. They're using it to set up the data management programs for evaluations, to align to regulatory compliance. And we have been conducting Dcam classes. Last year, we conducted classes in the third and fourth quarter. We had over 160 students attend. In 2016, we're going to be kicking off the classes again. In fact, next week we have a sold-out class for our foundations class in New York City. We're going to be expanding, running the classes not only in New York and London, but also in Toronto. And we're also adding an advanced class called the Applied class, which is taking the Dcam and actually using it from the perspective of an auditor, from the person conducting the exercise and how that would be run. So we're getting some really interesting interest in those classes as well. Now, one thing that we got out of all of this activity so far is a lot of feedback from our members. And the question has been, can we take the topics discussed in Dcam and do a deep dive, drill into some of these topics, not only for more detailed discussion, but also to discuss whether there's some type of a template or format or standard by which these capabilities can be applied in your organizations. The first one, the one that kicked out, seemed to be the highest interest, is around governance. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about my perspective of what I think this group is and what governance is, and then I'm going to open it up to the group for comment. Before I do that, any comments, Mike or Mike Meriton?
No, John, very good. Let's get going.
Then I will first ask Carol. Carol, could you just go through the logistics of the meeting for us?
Absolutely, everybody. As you'll notice that as you joined, your line joins completely muted. That's because there's so many on the call and the way the system works. So as we go through the agenda, if you have any questions or if you'd like to make comment, there's a few ways of doing so. One is to type into the chat record on the control panel, and I will be monitoring that. Alternatively, raise your hand again within the control panel, and I will keep an eye on who's raising their hands, and I will release your line so you can speak. And the final way is through the questions. Again, on the control panel, you'll see a section for questions. Please use any method. As soon as I see that you've got something to say, I'll release your line, and you will be able to make comment. Okay.
Great, Carol, thanks. Okay, so as promised, I'm just going to cover kind of an overview of data governance. Do we have Carol, people muted? There we go. Okay, good, thank you. I took this right from the Dcam, an explanation of data governance, and I'm going to just go over this to kind of level set us and then ask for input. So data governance, right? It's the process really for setting standards, defining the rules, getting the policies established so that people adhere to data management best practices. Data governance is really about the formalization of the program. We've seen over the course of everyone's career, I'm sure, where data programs were established without a formal backing. Data governance is a way of establishing that formally within the organization. I've listed a couple of things out of the Dcam purposes of data governance. Formalization of the program, as I just mentioned, establish the rules of engagement, funding, prioritization, compliance, etc., getting people to behave. Define the guidelines for data movement. How should data be acquired, persisted, distributed, used, archived, defensively destroyed? How should it be modeled? And how do you ensure integrity on all of those capabilities just described? The data management oversight. It is a control function. So what does that mean? It's establishing the guidelines. What are the approval process? What are the toll gates? What are the things that people have to go through before they access and use data? One of the key roles of governance is also to drive adoption. Data management is everybody's responsibility. Data governance creates the control environment through which people participate and ensure that there's integrity in the data. So that's defining the stakeholders, making sure they're empowered, creating the structure that supports data governance. And then ensuring accountability. The worst thing you can have is programs where it's everybody's responsibility and nobody's responsibility. So clearly delineated lines of authority, responsibility, it's assigned, and that's communicated throughout the organization. Central to that program are policies and standards. And this has come up a lot in our conversations with members. Is there a standard, excuse the use of the double word there, for policy and standards? What are policy and standards? What are principles? Many discussions around how deep or prescriptive they should be. Is there a guideline for that? Is there a template for that? And how should it be described? How should these policy and standards be enforced? And how do you measure success? From the program itself, what are the correct data governance roles and responsibilities that need to be filled? We talk about this a lot in terms of skill sets needed. How do you ensure that the stakeholders are there? There's good communication, there's buy-in, support, and funding. And what does the well-dressed data governance program look like? So I'm posing this to the group. The objective of this working group is to define the best practices associated with the creation, implementation, and enforcement of data governance, driven by policy, standards, and principles. So that's the end of my presentation and speech. You're going to see now what I'm going to do is do this interactively. I'm going to put this out to the group, and I'm going to start to collect notes. And this will create the foundation for this working group. So I'm going to start at a high level. We've got over 125 people on the call right now. Why are you here? What are the challenges you're facing? What are the issues you have? What are the experiences you have? Because this group is to share those experiences, and I believe it's to create a framework for how data governance should be built, established, policies and standards written and implemented. So Carol, I'm going to stop there. Any of my colleagues want to add to that, but I would now open it up to the group for comments, questions, and so forth, and I'll start to take notes in the dialogue. So Mike, do you want to just add anything to that before we open up?
Well, yeah, John, so, as you were describing it, I also was thinking that there is a couple of stages of governance that people have gone through. They've been set up the data management program, which you call the operating model, get your governance infrastructure defined. Then you have to make the governance operational, and that's getting people to do stuff along the lines of the data management rules and responsibilities. And then there is, how do you embed that into the way people operate and get them to think about data management, kind of as a way of operating? And I'm wondering where we are on that cycle. If you think of the first one is set up, the second one is make operational, and the third one is embed. I'm just kind of wondering where people are at this stage. So that's one of the things that I was kind of contemplating, John. And if I hear you correctly, you're really thinking about three big concepts: policies, roles, and in practice, right? Implementation experience.
Correct. Roles and structure, and then implementation. Got it. Thanks, Mike. Carol.
Okay. We have a few things that have come through. First of all, Daniel, I'm going to pronounce your surname wrong. I apologise. Ticcio, can you be heard? You had a comment.
This is Dean. Yes, Dean Bonney with MITRE.
Dean Bonney as well. Okay, perfect.
About the tension between governance and stewardship. I work with a lot of organizations with line and staff functions, and how the central organization, the staff function, creates governance, and that governance begets stewardship, and then how those stewardship roles are identified and funded at the line, and to ensure that data consumption and data management occurs effectively both at the line and enterprise level.
So Dean,
this is where I
is it a question of the relationship between that, or I think I heard you say tension between it at the beginning?
Well, there's tension, right? Because if I'm at the enterprise level and I define governance, and it requires stewardship, then the line or project functions have to, they're accepting that governance in order to be a part of the enterprise data management system, and that entails identifying people and support, paying for people basically.
So what does the partnership between governance at the enterprise and stewardship at the line actually look like, and how do you facilitate that?
Correct.
And that's a great point, actually.
So
have you started doing that, Dean? Where are you in that journey?
I work for the MITRE Corporation, so I'm working with several agencies in the Treasury Department, and we're at that level. We're trying to get that in place so that we can move forward and have a more enterprise approach to data management. Right now, most of the data management occurs at the project level. The enterprise level provides some services. And this is a key. Everyone, in surveys and interviews that I've conducted, MITRE is what's known as an FFRDC, we're a Research and Development Corporation. So we hire in at the government as trusted advisors. So all the surveys I've done with executives, this is one of the biggest issues that comes up.
So Dean, having spent 3 years with the government, I know the challenge of working with the agencies. But you know what? It's funny. It's the same thing even within the private sector. The experience I had was to engage the lines of business in and allocate out responsibilities so they feel to be a part of the objective of governance, as opposed to just being imposed on them. And I throw that out to the group if people have had similar approaches and hopefully successes in doing it that way versus it just being a top-down initiative versus a collaborative issue where everybody works together on establishing the policy and standards, and then it seems the adoption was easier because everybody was agreeing to it because they participated.
However, John, in many ways it has been imposed on line of business because a data management function emerged out of frequently a regulatory requirement, and now all of a sudden you're trying to implement it downstream, and it wasn't their idea.
So I'm going to say soften the imposition of policy and standard.
Well, you really want to buy in, right? It's really about buy-in. Go ahead, tell this.
Hey, it's Genevieve from State Street. So I think it's also part about the it's the value statement, right? So to the point of it's being enforced, I agree. It's being enforced by the regulators within certain areas, and that's what's driving, I think, a lot of the data management programs across the data governance and management programs across the industry. But the challenge is it's a combination of it has to come top down, but it also has to be collaborative. But most importantly, it's the messaging around the value, like why governance, why you need governance, how it's going to help, not that you need it because the regulators mandate you to do so, right? And you know, my second point is also related to the lack of consistency around definitions and things that we call. Like I run into challenges where you can go onto Google and find various definitions for the same thing over and over again. So I think part of what this group should be doing is helping to drive around those standards. You know, it's not just here's a process to how we govern, it's actually getting into the weeds of the details of how we can successfully govern it and leverage industry participants to create a lot of that intel that we can share.
Genevieve, when you talk about...
So Jen, go ahead, John.
I'm sorry. When you talk about the definitions, you're talking about from a governance perspective, like what are policy standards, those types of definitions, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that and then some, right? I think it can grow. Like I'm just, you know, like I think it's not even just definitions, it's terminology. Consistent terminology is probably what I would actually say. Because I can tell you, you know, just throwing samples, you know, you hear the term trusted sources, golden sources, master data, reference data, market data, just standardizing on common domains of data that we should all look at and then building upon that. Because that, you know, we're financial services. Everybody on this phone is doing very similar things. Let's try to do the stuff that we all have to do anyway together.
So common language about governance and its components.
Yes.
Which is a fantastic idea and always needed to get things started.
Well, Mike, I'll add to that, Genevieve. I was just working with a member on reference data, and I was shocked to find out that reference data, master data management, all have different definitions.
Yes,
Still.
they do.
And people actually didn't know when we speak about reference data, for example, that reference data is lots of data, right? It's ISO country codes, it's this, it's that. People thought it was one thing. And I was shocked to see that, but I guess not shocked because we don't define it consistently. So that's a really good point. Go ahead, Mike, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just wondering whether you're tying in the value statement challenge, which is the need for buy-in, with the understanding and language about what it is we're talking about. So these all kind of blend together in some way in my mind. So I'm just wondering, Jen, how you think about it.
I mean, everything ties together, right? Because in the end, when you're trying to manage the value statement, I mean, the value statement, you basically it's pretty straightforward. We all know there's the cost efficiencies, there's a revenue opportunity, there's the regulatory needs, right? Those are the blanket statements that we can all agree to. But it's actually the tangible, like actually showing real life value. But then, you know, the problem is that, you know, when you're dealing with these executives, you know, they're obviously interfacing with executives across the industry. And if people aren't talking the same language, you know, they'll challenge you back. Well, wait a minute, this company is doing it this way and this company is doing it that way. So I'm just trying to, it's consistency at the industry level to build to that common value statement, right? That governance is just part of your everyday life. It's not a separate program that is being forced down your throat by the regulators. It's just something we should be doing because we should have been doing it a long time ago.
But there is a problem in that frequently the data infrastructure does work in the business silo. So you're getting, you have to get people to buy into doing something differently when they already have something that's working for them, and then asking people to slow down when they're kind of racing against the pace of business for enterprise-wide consistency is not an easy sell.
Oh, trust me, I know. I've been living it for a year. Not easy. But that's the point, though, right? So, I'll shut up because I think it's really, we have to find that balance, right? It's that balance of communication. It's that balance of adoption. But to your point, we also have to meet the tangible, deliverables that we have to satisfy. So how do we do this more effectively to meet those timelines? And to me, through the industry collaboration, we can get a lot done more quickly than doing them independently.
Hey, Mike, I'm just looking at a comment that a Mike Smith, hi Mike, put in. He said, I think we have to start with the why. Data governance is an organizational behavior change management process. 4 to 5 data governance programs fail for this reason. So I think that supports, Jen, what you're saying. That there's got to be a value statement as to why we're doing governance.
John, it's Tim Patnode from Schwab. I would add one other thing in here that's become pretty visible to me over the past couple of years, and that is that governance needs to be part of the standard management curriculum. In being a manager these days, you have to be able to just manage data as part of your job. And if you think about it in terms of, for years, managers are expected to manage budgets, to hire people, to develop products. Part of it should also be governing your data. And I don't think that we have quite adopted that yet as a strategy in the management culture.
So Tim, where does this manager curriculum for regular business operations take place? It's on the job training, right? So are you suggesting that data management becomes an on the job training part of kind of basic management skill sets?
Yeah, it needs to be written into the job description as something that you do. It needs to be bonused as part of, just like any other function of management that you would expect a manager to perform. They need to start thinking about the data that they use and how it's being managed within their organization. And I think whether it's part of an industry curriculum or it needs to be built up into management school curricula, all of those kinds of things I think are just part of bringing governance forward and not thinking about it as this extra thing that we have to do. It's just part of the job that I have to do.
That's a good point. So it is an expected skill set, not something that's unique and unusual. People should be trained in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just think about it from the previous conversation so far. We're not still clear on the why. We don't have a common language with which to talk about the objectives and the components. And Tim, if you don't mind, I just kind of characterize, and we don't know how to do it either.
Yeah, I think
so it's hard to embed that when you don't really know how to do it. You don't understand why you're doing it.
Yeah, I think it is formative within the organization, but it's we don't have the luxury of a lot of time to do it. I mean, if I look at the landscape that I have to manage, it's enormous. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of regulatory demand in there, and we have to be able to ramp those skills up very quickly across the organization. So it's incumbent on us in the governance field to really go out and try to figure this stuff out very quickly and codify it in a way that management can, at any level, can really start to understand what their jobs are.
Hey, this is Carrie Fawcett, and I'd like to kind of add to two different aspects of this. One is Tim's comment about it being in the standard management curriculum. One of the things where we've had some success is giving some autonomy to the folks that end up being named as data stewards by letting them establish their own scope and priorities, right? And you can do that by aligning to things like, you know, their business continuity process or risk and control processes where they're already doing this, you know, and these are also other areas where I know organizations struggle with, you know, compliance to the policy, right? You know, they see it as a check the box. However, the more we augment the thinking around looking at where your risk is, where your critical systems are, data to me is a very logical step, and to say, hey, the data, you know, that is in those systems is the most important, and so it can help with identifying scope. And when you go back to the value statement, then it's very difficult for someone to say, oh, the data quality of this critical system isn't important. No, you know, no one can say that.
And who is that speaking? I'm sorry.
It's Carrie Foster from TIAA.
Carrie?
Yeah, it's C-A-R-R-I-E.
Oh, thank you.
There you go.
So Carrie, just a couple of questions on that. So if I hear you correctly, the stewards that are selected are already doing the job of data management in some way. If we listen to and incorporate what they're doing, let them create the function of stewardship, then they're more likely to own it. Is that kind of consistent with what you said?
Yeah, and what I'll say is that, you know, while I've seen challenges in people actually owning it, right? So either the hat has been placed upon them, it's not their full-time job, you know, they're trying to get stewardship done as part of whatever else they do. When you help them, or when you give them that autonomy and the latitude to say, you build your own, you know, we're going to guide you, right? We're going to provide a toolbox for you. We're going to give you some boundaries, but you can start to define it yourself. And as with maturity of any organization, what we've seen is that we may have some organizations who take it quite seriously, you know, and they will break their whole function down into, say, a dozen or 15 different subject areas or domains. And others will say, oh, I only have one. But, you know, at least,
Carrie,
you know,
how do you align then? How do you align and ensure overall governance consistency? So I understand your point. I think it's fantastic, which is people create what is real for them because they're living there. You know, that's their work environment. But do you worry at all about consistency and repeatability?
And Carrie, before you answer that question, I want to add on to that, you know, just to build upon it. You know, are you doing it based on having at least a standard framework that they're applying? Because if you're trying to instill an enterprise program, you know, if this, I mean, I agree, give them autonomy, but autonomy with direction. Because to me, then if you have 5 stewards going on their own, doing their own thing, you lose the purpose of consistency, and how do you have an enterprise view?
So
absolutely.
Guys, I'm going to
go ahead. Look, Carrie first.
Oh, go ahead, Carrie.
Go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay, so we do have consistency. Well, we're trying to put consistency in place, right? In terms of we've created, I mean, we do have our policies and we have our standards, but what we've done is we've created a series of practices and a very robust playbook. So, you know, we give that to them and say, these are the steps you have to follow. And to be honest with you, it does take, you know, a lot of work from our team, you know, the actual governance team itself, to make sure that people understand how to fill out their templates, what steps they're supposed to be taking at any given time, because everybody's on this huge vertical learning curve right now. So we've defined the consistency in our best practices, and now it's rolling out the best practices so folks have a way of adopting them. And by virtue of following the best practices, they will automatically be compliant with the policy, because we've made them, you know, we've done the traceability between our standards and our best practices.
So where does the autonomy come in? I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
I'm in Carrie's court. This is an important issue, and that's why I identified this could be one of the things we focus on, is the role of the steward. I believe that the data steward needs autonomy because they're operating within the line of business to service their business. However, if we think of governance from a federated perspective says there's a set of enterprise guidelines, and then there's implementation of those guidelines within the state, if you will, within the line of business. So there's got to be some flexibility that the stewards can have so they can employ it in their space, but there is control and consistency by doing it at a federal level, if you will, with guidelines. And I think this is a good area to discuss and to drive some standards around what is the role of the data steward in relationship to the larger corporate objective.
And John, and actually, just to clarify, I'm in that role as well, but just original statement, we're federated as well. You will not be successful unless you have a federated model for the magnitude of our organization, but there has to be a framework with roles defined, expectations, accountability, etc. So I'm all for that because people need to be empowered too.
So how do you draw the distinction between playbook and consistency or best practice?
So, for example, what we've done is our playbook may have, certain processes and that folks follow, right? So the initial process that we have everybody do is to define their subject area or their domain. So, we start them out small, define your yard, basically. So again, they can define it any way they want. We give them guidelines at what makes a well-written domain definition. And we review them. And so from a centralized point, that's one of the things that we do is we're in the process of reviewing all of their definitions and making sure that they can hold water and that they're written in a way that anybody can understand them, right? And then you build on that. Okay, so what's the next thing you do? Well, you look at your work products. What are your key outputs? What are you producing and your team? And then once you have those key outputs, those products, then you have to prioritize them because teams are going to have, hundreds and possibly thousands of them, right? Your controller's team is going to have all your regulatory reports. So they try to prioritize them based on where they're going to focus. And what we've done is given them latitude. Well, we've given them some criteria regarding who the consumers are. For example, if the consumers are regulators or if the consumers are, board level reporting and high level decision making and things like that, then those would be areas where you should be focusing. But also, have them focus on new processes or processes where there are known data issues or challenges that they've had in the past. And we give them, kind of a host of different things to think about in terms of how they should frame up, their area of focus, knowing up front that everything's not going to get done, and they're going to have to figure out how to focus on what's most important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me just bring it back. Carrie, thank you. I want to
so somebody's trying to say something, John. There's another.
I want to open up well, one thing I want to do, guys, on this call, since we only limited hours, I don't want to go too deep on any topic. The goal here is to identify those areas, and then the group will work on, and I'll try to identify these subgroups to dig deep into. So there were other comments.
Hey,
Carol?
John. Yes. This is Peter.
John?
Okay, go, Peter.
Just wanted to make one comment that I want to second Genevieve. Hi, Genevieve. It's Peter Kapoor from AIG. One of the things I think which is somewhat inconsistent, we're with governance, we're always talking about control and standards. And at the same time, we're talking about business buy-in, value proposition. And a lot of the times when you're going to the business and all, when you're purely looking at a control and standards, how do you go put the operational efficiency and what they want to do is how do I make more money with data management? So a lot of governance tends to be control. How do we tie it to business value when we're always emphasizing purely control?
If you're asking me, that's the challenge.
No, I'm just bringing up the point.
I agree with you, and that is the happy medium, right? How do we bring this all together to say it's not? Yes, in the end, you get better control around your content and more transparency into your data. But you're right. How do you translate that into the
governance
value?
as governance as an enabler? And that's what we're trying to do in our aspect is, that there's always an aspect you can say, listen, you're actually going to get better. You're going to get better data. You're going to make more money if you add the 1% for governance. Versus we go the other way around and say, okay, we're going to give you control and standards.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think
it's just one perception. Yeah.
That's part of the value prop, right? It has to be clear that creating a control environment, not necessarily controls, is going to minimize errors, reduce data reconciliations, avoid regulatory and compliance issues. That kind of stuff has to be tied into the value prop of it. So I think what I'm hearing is we need to have we need to have a way to define the value prop, right?
Yeah.
So, define. That's
John?
Yeah.
John, just one second, because just a question for you, Peter. Because there are some things that you just have to do, right? You have to use the standard glossary definitions. You have to get your data from the right sources. You have to, follow the rules in order to reap the value. So sometimes you just have to get it. There are things you have to do.
And I totally agree with that. I just think what we need to do is place it, things that we have to do. We all know what the value is. Put it into the value proposition.
Yep.
As in, if you were, for example, and I think John just mentioned, hey, listen, this is going to be less errors for you, versus you must do it because you must do it.
Mm-hmm. So we'll make that one of the objectives, that we need to define the value prop, and I think that's
and value prop, and a lot of it becomes more when we talked in a federated way, trying to tie it more to the language of the business, to the lines of the business. When you're at the enterprise level, we need to make sure that we tie all of that governance to the language of the business.
This is Lisa Davis. I was going to say I agree with that, and I think that when we do define this value proposition, that we need to especially address our senior executives, especially those who can help us implement the umbrella part of the federated model, the part that goes across the enterprise, helping us to, we need help breaking down the barriers. But without that top-down support, you don't get the enterprise level governance without your senior management support.
Frederick, you had a statement, a comment?
Yeah, I just want to turn a little bit upside down conversation, if you don't mind. I think from, my perspective, I think the things that, would be very valuable to get out of the working group, are the things that, we can have some examples, like on the policies, maybe not one policy, but few, maybe, example of the enterprise level policy, maybe example of some, business line or function, level type of the policies in the data management. I think that would be extremely valuable to, all of the participants, even if they have a policy, to just compare, with some standard type of the approach. Is everything really, within that? Two, when we talk about standards, it's not just the examples, I would say, in the standards, I think similarly like with the procedures, I think it would be good to create some type of the classification of the type of the standards or type of the procedures that we want to see within the governance. And then lastly, the third topic, which I think would be also valuable, not particular tools, but what are, the type of the expectations from the data governance tools that, the team, sees. I think, again, sharing that, between, the different participants in the working group would be very valuable from my point of view.
Excellent. I got it all. And it was really kicked off this group originally was, are there standard way to create policy? What is the definition? I know I share this conversation with my colleagues at Charles Schwab. We had months of discussion, a month of discussion. What is a standard? What is a policy? What is a guideline? We don't have standard definitions for those, and it makes it hard to write them if we don't know what they are. I think one of the goals of this group definitely should be to create, and that goes back to, I didn't highlight it actually, where's the standard definitions? Came out before, right? There we go, lack of consistent definitions. We have to come up with a dictionary, if you will, of what we're talking about. Otherwise we can't define the value prop. That's a great point.
Hi.
This
Sorry.
is Dean Bonney with for the government, the value proposition really is focused on data consumption and data consumption and how to consolidate resources in order to improve data consumption at the enterprise level. And I like what you had to say, Kerry, about the data steward autonomy. A lot of the agencies within the Treasury Department have these organic data stewards who have never even called themselves that. Introduced the phrase, but the autonomy exists, and they're they desire more efficient and effective data consumption, data marts, for instance, that they can all basically share data and apply good data analytics against. But it's a difficult thing to do.
And by consumption, Dean, you mean quality, trust, and accessibility type of things?
Yes, I do, absolutely.
Right.
The provenance of the data, the quality of the data, security of the data.
Listen, since this is our first meeting, I'm very conscious of time. We're running with 50 minutes left. Let me just go to the next topic.
Can I just interject for 2 seconds? There are
Sure.
There are quite a few people who've raised their hands or have raised questions in the question bar. I think if we can leave, a good 5 minutes at the end, we can review if any of those are still outstanding, because I know a lot has been asked. Okay.
And Carol, we can capture all those questions, right?
Absolutely, nothing will be lost. Absolutely.
So everybody who wrote questions, if we don't get to them, we got them. And we're going to put it into this program. So please keep typing, capture them. And maybe we kind of covered this. What's the scope of what should the scope include? I think, Mike, you identified the different areas of governance when you said it was stages, set up, operational, making it operational, embedding it. I had laid it out as there are different categories of governance. There's content governance around the data itself. One of the questions I saw was a question of whether it should be called data management governance or data governance. Is it the governance of the program or the governance of data? I think it's both. I think it's the governance of content. It's how you ensure that infrastructure, the IT, is properly governed in support of data management. It's the program itself. What's the program structure, the people? We discussed this just now on the roles of the data steward. And then there's cross-functional governance. How does data coordinate with cross-border and privacy and all of those other control functions? So I think we have to include all of these in the scope. Am I leaving anything out in the scope? Let me throw that question out if people have any comments on this proposed scope statement.
Hi, yeah, it's Lou Nagel here. I guess I was going to ask a question around whether we should focus on the overall program or change governance as well as the data governance. And the reason for that is, I guess, that there's already a lot of standards that enterprises have around the way that they like to manage change. And often it's change that creates the need for a data management function in the first place. So just wondering whether we need to draw a line between the data side of the governance and the change governance side.
And who is that speaking? I'm sorry.
It's Lou Nagel, 2LZW.
So change
Lou, tell me what you mean by governance over the management of change, just so I understand it.
Well, what I'm getting at is there's already quite a few standards around how change is governed, and some of those standards are well defined within an organization already. And I think if we're looking to try and encompass that, which includes some of the value proposition as well, within the overall governance of data, I think it's a much bigger thing to try and do rather than just focusing purely on the data governance.
Well, I think the data is a change function, data management. So I think it's a good idea to introduce some of those concepts into the discussion. Unless anybody disagrees, I think we should consider that when we look at this. And I think it covers everything, right? I mean, it's change governance around content, infrastructure, program, everything. Right?
I think if we go that route, we're going to be trying to redefine a lot of well-established standards within organizations, because change is not just around data, it's around everything. It's around the infrastructure, it's around personnel, and often organizations have a well-defined structure about how they want to run that and govern it.
Yep. So data's got to fit into how the organization operates.
Any other questions around scope?
Hey, this is Vijay, and this point that John that you raised about cross-control functional governance, that's an area of interest to us quite a bit, and especially because in our case, the data governance program came in. Before the data governance program, we had a pretty robust SOX program. We had models governance, we had privacy, InfoSec, and so on. And once we started the data governance program, we're spending a lot of time to see that our policies kind of are aligned to what the others have done, or at least we understand who's doing what and not kind of stepping on each other's toes. So that's an area of extreme interest to us.
Yep. Excellent. Okay.
Well, in many ways, Vijay, those cross-functional things existed first.
Yeah.
They were already
yeah. Yes.
In fact, one of the discussion groups that will be kicked off in 2 weeks is around data management and info security. So how do those two control processes work together? So yep, it's an important. There'll be a little bit of overlap there, but yeah, clearly an important point.
Yes, hello, this is Natalie from Intact Investment Management. I just want to get back on the infrastructure IT governance point. I think it's something we should consider as a group, just because that we may have all these guidelines and principles on data and definitions, but if the IT doesn't have governance around that, at least at a general level, I think what the work we'll do on data and defining principles, we'll have just half of the work done. So I just wanted to, in my opinion, on my side, I think it'd be important that we include it in the scope and the goals of this working group.
Now, are you saying that it should be or it shouldn't be? I mean, when I said to include it, there's a role that IT plays that is not, IT has to do IT, right? They have to make sure their platforms are consistent and so forth. But when it comes to the objectives of data management, there has to be a good coordination between the two. And that's what I was referring to in terms of infrastructure governance. Data should not be managing IT, but data should be working with IT to ensure that its policy and standards can be supported by IT. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, absolutely. That was exactly my point, because the first comment I was hearing, I think we were talking about excluding possibly the change governance. So I definitely think it would be valuable if we go the extra step and include the relationship and how, because they are in fact very close partners, and that in defining all the principles and the governance, and one goes with the other.
Yeah. So I think we need to have some type of a guideline for the relationship between the data team and the IT team.
You can even make that a little broader, John, because really it's about consistent governance. And consistent governance includes all of the things that have been talked about, including IT, cross-functional, and organizational process.
I agree with you there, Mike, but I think what I'm hearing Natalie saying, I agree, because of all the teams that need to work together well, it's IT and data, to position or propose some guidelines for that relationship, I think would be very helpful and important. Is that a fair statement to make?
Oh, I understand it. I have no problem with that. That's important.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Lata. I just wanted to understand a little bit about how do we show the effectiveness of the data governance program. So we are seeing effective data governance program is made up of these 4 streams, and we all have data governance implementation done in our organization like a few years ago. And we have different people, we are working together, different entities in the organization, we are working together. And in addition to showing them the value proposition, but how do you show some tangible that everyone can relate to? How do you show the effect, like some kind of a scorecard for data governance? Does anyone do like a scorecard?
There was a conversation yesterday about creating the metrics on the problem of data management and what it really means to the end users as the most effective way of getting people to buy into the data programs.
Am I hearing this is a communication challenge?
Yes, initially, you try to get lines of business, you try to get different players like data governors, operational data stewards, data domain stewards, data custodians, other entities, everybody on board with data governance program. But then, initially you talk about theory and you talk about some objectives and propositions and PowerPoint slides and everything. But then after a while, people want to see something tangible, right? How do you prove that, okay, in these 3-4 years, the implementation has happened, we have, made progress on so and so things, something like a balanced scorecard, something that anybody uses to show those results. Measurement.
Yeah, measurement. So I think I kind of captured that in the in my opening statement. Is how do you measure success? So I think we should put that as one of the things in the group in terms of. So I put it here. I should actually put it into this section. So let's include success criteria.
Right. And my name is Lata, L-A-T-A.
L-A-T-A. Got
From
it.
where, Lata?
From Moody's Corporation.
Moody's. Yep.
Thank you. All right, we're running down to the wire. I'm sorry. I was, this is great, and we'll have other follow-up conversations. I want to get to one other section. Expected outcomes, and this is a quick question. What would you like to see this group produce? Would it be a white paper on these topics, or a set of guidelines, or PowerPoint presentation, or something to be published? Any quick thoughts on, and we don't have to have all the answers here now, but just a sense of, what would you like to see as the product that comes out of this group?
A playbook, a data governance playbook.
Playbook, I like that. Okay.
White paper clarity.
I would like to see some high level presentation that would be good for executive management, kind of like that walk around. How do we start that conversation with the top of the house?
Okay.
I think equally, I would go for that more high level view of having a checklist or a playbook or even a framework that you can use to articulate what you need to have governance.
How about an organizational framework? I'm adding that.
You own the pen, John. Keep going.
I can write that.
So, John, just to be clear, and the playbook is the documentation, because white papers are thought leader papers. Like, this is a tangible output. Within the playbook, you should have that high level, value statement. It should speak to the roles and responsibilities, the operating model. It's really that document that people should be able to use to successfully implement data governance.
So we have to define what's in that playbook. So it'd be things like value prop, guidelines, example.
Recommended operating model for federated, like federated versus,
I think
everything we talked about today needs to be crisped up into like, this is kind of what you need to do to be successful.
Yep. So it's really everything.
Well, but there is an output. The output is the, let's call it the data governance playbook, to steal Jen's tagline. But now defining what that is and how you approach it is, the onward task.
And for those old enough to remember the other title of everything you wanted to know about something I was afraid to ask, I included that.
But let's not ignore Predrag's examples and kind of a library of policies, procedures, standards.
Examples are there.
That was okay.
Library.
And there are quite a few comments with suggestions as well. Model scorecards, swim lane diagrams, data governance metrics and controls, practical guidelines, template examples, integration techniques.
Integration is a great point.
Okay. Industry standards examples. So there are lots there which will be captured.
Excellent. We're about 2 minutes away, so I'm gonna go to the next point. In terms of how we can conduct the meeting now, don't worry about, again, the answers here. What I'm proposing is I'm going to take all this feedback, put it into kind of a framework, and then we'll probably conduct another meeting. I think we're going to need 2 hours, not an hour, because obviously we ran short here. But I also suggest the idea of, as we start to create components of this, since we have such a large group, to maybe break it down into subgroups, and perhaps people would like to step forward and want to chair one of those subgroups. And then they'll coordinate with me as the different groups can be conducted. I'm planning on running these meetings every 3 weeks, but that doesn't stop a subgroup from, say, having a call amongst yourselves and chatting through it and bringing it back to the larger call. Does that make sense for everybody? Would that work? And are people willing to, say, have a call on their own, for example, with a smaller group to discuss a topic?
John, you've got to add into that, what's the mechanism for coordination? Are we using the wiki or are we using something else?
Yes, I forgot that, Mike. I'm going to set up, there's a wiki tool that my colleague Dennis Wisnowski uses for 5.0, where he shares everybody's feedback. I'm going to set that up as well. It wasn't ready for today, but I'll get that out. But is the idea of having subgroups and maybe even having people step up and, you know, wanting to chair those groups, is that something people would be willing to do?
Yes.
You've definitely got some already confirmed yes on the questions on the chat. So there is quite a few people that are saying yes to that, John.
Excellent, excellent, good. With 1 minute left, Carol, you said there were some final questions.
I think if you look at the number of questions, there are far too many to try and go through. I have tried to release everybody's numbers, everybody's lines as we've gone along. All I'd say is if anyone has got an urgent request, given there's only 1 minute left, please email it if you haven't already sent it via a question, so that I can see it.
And being respectful of everybody's time, folks, thank you very, very much. This is really great number of people, ton of comments. This is going to be a really good group. Give me time to ingest everything that's been provided. We'll have something set up in the next 3 weeks. That's the goal. Mike and I are doing some traveling, so it might be 4, so bear with us. But this was fantastic, and we'll get feedback back to you shortly and continue this dialogue.
Thank you, John.
Mike, before we close, that's it?
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.